Okay, so far we've actually just been spending our time on the grid container, and we haven't spent any time on the grid items or how to actually size them to be the size that we want. So let's break that down. We'll open up O9 sizing grid items and open up sizing items. Now let's give ourselves a bunch of items. So I'm going to say .item, and I'm also give it a class of item $, and that'll give us item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. Inside of that, I'll just give our number again, and let's go nuts and give ourselves 30 items here. And that should give us 30 divs, each with a class of item and item 1, 2, 3, all the way through 30. What do we got there? Good, looking good. Now let's just give ourselves a very basic grid that we have here. So grid template columns. Let's repeat 5 times 1 FR. Good. So this gives us a grid of 5 by however many high that we need. All right. So how do you actually size some of our items in it? Well, you might think like I could just go into here and say like item 9. Maybe we'll change the background of that to be something like Misty Rose. And we should see item 9 is now Misty Rose. And if you were to give that a width of 500 pixels, what happens? Whoa. So this is very similar to how that last one worked where we actually had an item. What we did is we explicitly put a width on the 500 pixel item. And what CSS Grid did is remember that FR stands for free space. And before you can have free space, you have to use up the paid space. So what CSS does is it says, okay, first item 9 has to be 500 pixels wide. So it takes the column that item 9 is in and it will size that to be 500 pixels wide. And then it says, all right, I'm done. Got a bunch of extra space. Who wants it? Let's split it up evenly with 1 FR throughout the rest of the columns. So by sizing this 500 pixels, and similarly, if I were to take that off and I were to make my item 9 really long, like put some text in there without putting a space in it, because if you put a space in it, it'll just break onto the next line. But let's say something inside of item 9, whether it's an image with a hard width or a really long word or anything that is inside of it is causing that item to be that wide, then it's going to first allot the width of that column because of the width of the content inside of it. And then it will then divvy up the actual space between the other two. Okay, that's good. But I'm not really happy about the fact that it kind of takes the entire column along for the ride. So rather than relying on content width or giving it a fixed width of something like 500 px, what we do is we use something called spanning in CSS Grid, and we can explicitly tell some of our items to be a specific width. So I'm going to bring this back to 9. And let's open up our dev tools so we can sort of see what's going on. I'm going to go to my layout tab and turn on the grid inspector, make it black. Beautiful. Cool. So we got our numbers showing up. Now we have item 9 here, and I want this to take up the spot where 9 and 10 is. So the way that we can do that, it was something called spanning. So we'll say grid column, and we can say span 2. So if by default, grid items just naturally flow one after another, and as there is space for each one, they will fit themselves into the grid as they can. However, if you wish for an item to take up multiple spots inside of a grid, you can tell it to span 2. So give that a save, and whoa, okay, look what happened here now. So it still starts where it naturally did, but now it is spanning 2 without giving it any sort of explicit width. And then 10 was then bumped on to the next line because that's the next available space for 10 to actually go. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about how grid auto flow dense works. So span 2, what would happen if we did span 3? Where is it gonna go all the way here? Place your bets, ladies and gentlemen. Bah. Ooh, what happened here? Okay, so now we have a bit of a dead space here. And the reason behind that is because the browser will lay out each one after another. And as it gets to 9, it says, okay, this one needs to span 3, but I only got space for 2. So what it's going to do is it's going to start again on the next line and leave those empty. We'll talk about how do we Like, wouldn't it be nice if we could just put 10 and 11 right there? And that's totally possible with the dense option that I've been talking about. Similarly, let's bring it back to 2 so we can put it right there. If you want to span multiple rows as well, you totally can. So it's just grid row, and that is span 2. And that will, give us 2 high and allow us to go. And this is really starting to show the power of CSS Grid, because I'm not doing any floats. I'm not doing any absolute positioning. I'm just putting the item for as wide as I want. And if I were to have another item before 9, so here, and I would just put like a poop or something like that in there, then it's going to push it on to the next line and figure out where can you possibly fit this item where it makes sense. Good. So span 2 on row. You can span them as much as you want. What would happen if you were to span more than you have available? So maybe if I were to span like something like 10. Whoa. Ooh, that's the kind of interesting there. What did we have before? How many numbers did we have? We had 6, but if I were to span 10 more than we had, it will automatically force the grid to be larger than it wants. And let's do a little zoom in investigation here. Remember, we talked about the solid line being the end of the explicit grid. We only told it to be 5 columns, each 1 FR. But however, if it just can't fit itself, it's going to start creating implicit columns or implicit rows. In this case, it's creating implicit rows. It makes extra ones, and it knows to just sort of keep filling them with the extra items that we have. Good. Then in the next video, what we're going to talk about is spanning is great, but what if I just want to tell it exactly where I wish for this item to go? And that's where we get into actually placing grid items.